Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan.
Welcome to another Toronto Rehab Week 2019 Spotlight interview presented by IFAS, the International Functional Electrical Stimulation Society. Thanks to them for sponsoring these episodes.
So we're here at a coffee shop at Rehab Week, and we've had the pleasure to sit down with David Pitino, who is from Mount Sinai. He was one of the keynote speakers yesterday, and you really talked about innovation, David. So can you kind of give us a quick summary of what you think are some of the opportunities and some of the barriers that we see in this technology innovation space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that health technology is just, we've all seen an exponential curve before. It's growing at an exponential rate. People are realizing that they can make technology much cheaper than ever before, and impressive technology that can do things that we didn't know technology could do. So I think that there's a number of different growing sectors in rehab robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, wearable sensors, like we've all heard this before. And they all have a lot of possibility, but there are also some really serious barriers to actually making these things a reality. Primarily, the biggest barriers relate to the fact that people tend to be developing in silos. So we have people who are interested in starting a health tech company. I often hear the origin story from most health tech founders. Their pitch is, I had this singular experience and then I saw a problem with the healthcare system, so I went about solving it. And along the way, we don't hear too much about, well, then I spoke to 1,000 doctors and I shadowed a doctor for 3 months, and then I spoke to 1,000 patients, and then I found out where my product would actually lie in the whole spectrum of things. It's always happening from a subjective opinion, and then people sort of develop in a silo, and then they realize once they've spent quite a bit of money, oh God, we've actually got to clinically trial this thing, we've got to talk to the FDA, we've got to convince doctors to use it, we've got to convince patients to use it, and that becomes a whole bunch of a mess. So that was when I realized a lot of those limitations. That was when I actually started my lab, the Abilities Research Center at Mount Sinai, which is really focused on being a space where entrepreneurs can go and learn all that stuff, get access to patients, doctors, shadow doctors, learn a little bit about how the whole process works and how their product might fit into that whole ecosystem. And then we sort of just help them become a product.
Really neat.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it kind of does sound like, hey, Facebook for cats, like this kind of business model is different than the med space because, there's just so many more moving parts and it's so much more expensive. So you don't have that run rate, right? When you make a mistake and eventually pivot, which everybody does, you might not be able to have money for that because you're going to be blowing through millions of dollars per month because you got to run so many trials and everything like this. So it's absolutely essential to talk to people that you may otherwise never talk to. I mean, I don't know about you, I don't talk to stroke victims that often on a regular basis, for example. So if that's my target market, then
You should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you should be talking to them 100 times a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But people don't.
And that really touches on one of the things that always surprised me, especially when we were getting ready for SCI 2020 earlier this year, is how many tech innovators have never talked to their end user.
Yeah.
And you touched on that on your keynote yesterday. So really your lab is very hands-on, and you're really kind of touching base and really getting close to what we call the patient or the clinician and understanding to solve the problem.
Absolutely. We have people with spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, stroke, Parkinson's coming through the lab all the time. We also have just entrepreneurs and engineers stopping by, not to do anything other than to chat with stroke patients and other patients that they want to work with. They also talk with doctors. Everything that we try to do is, we're a core facility for the hospital where everyone can just come together, have a good conversation, maybe have a beer, and move things along. And we really, really focus on making sure that everyone feels this very transparent, very open environment when they come into the space.
And just real quickly, you touched on yesterday some of the partnerships that you've worked on with Not Impossible Labs. Can you kind of tell us our role and what they do and how you got involved with them?
Yeah, so I mean, Not Impossible really is, God, who knows how to describe them? They're part incubator, accelerator, part just marketing company, frankly, and part storytellers. And they're always just interested in, I think if you were to really pin it down, they solve absurdities. So they find problems that are absurd, that shouldn't exist, and they look to solve. The first project that we ever did at Not Impossible was called the iWriter, and it was all focused on the fact that we had a young man with ALS who couldn't communicate with the outside world and couldn't afford, at the time, $40,000 Tobii eye tracker. So we made him a $20 eye tracker out of scraps and webcams and things like that, that allowed him not only to communicate again, but also to create. And really, it all stemmed from the fact that this seems like an absurd problem. It seems like eye tracking technology just shouldn't cost this much. So let's look into how hard it actually is to make eye tracking technology. And turns out it was pretty cheap and pretty easy to do a once-off.
Yeah. Really neat organization.
Yeah, I really love it because it shows how easy it can be. You're just kind of like, I don't know, from a talk yesterday, you're just kind of like, yeah, and then we did it. And it's just like, of course, like this is what we do. So of course we're going to do this. And we threw it together relatively quickly, and then we share it with the world.
Yes.
That's the ethical thing to do.
It's a somewhat privileged stance, or at least a very, I forget the quote, but it's something along the lines of, you'd be amazed what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. Whereby, up until now, the work I've done with No Impossible, and a lot of the innovation work I've done on my own, is just disrupt and walk away. We're going to solve this problem because it's stupid that this is a problem. And then we're going to leave the code and everything open source. And then we're going to walk away from it. We're going to let the community take care of the rest of it. And what we observed with a lot of Not Impossible projects was it really worked for developing new industries. So, for instance, after the iWriter, although if you're being perfectly honest, brutally honest, the iWriter was a piece of crap. It worked, but it was a piece of crap. The fact that we showed everyone what we did and left the code open source and allowed people to play, if you actually just study market trends, what happened afterwards was Tobii technology went from $40,000 down to $200. You know, the Tobii IX now costs $200 and is fully integrated with Windows 10. When we did Project Daniel, we were the first 3D printable prosthetic hand on the Thingiverse, because the Thingiverse was still a thing when we did it. And then we saw the entire industry of prosthetics, of 3D printed prosthetics, just emerge overnight. And in terms of impact, to me, that was the impact. It wasn't measured in monetary value. It was measured in, hey, we actually made two industries a lot better and a lot more, affordable for individuals who actually need them. So I like to think of that as the impact, and sadly that I'm not laying on a bed of $100 bills.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's one way to get stuff done.
Well, David, thank you for your time. Always great to talk to you. We'd love to have you on for a full interview, but great to see you at Rehab Week.
Awesome to see you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.